to introduce Esther Amini, author of Concealed. Esther is a writer, painter, and psychoanalytic psychotherapist in private practice. Her short stories have appeared in Elle, Lilith, Tablet, The Jewish Week, and Proximity. Her pieces have been performed by the Jewish Women's Theater, which named her Artist in Residence in 2019. Esther lives in New York City with her husband. Concealed, the story of her growing up in Queens as an American born daughter of Persian-Jewish immigrant parents who fled Mashad, Iran, is her debut memoir. And Esther, would you like to start explaining to us what the book is all about? And thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to backtrack a bit. Jews lived in ancient Iran for 2,700 years, making them the oldest community in the Jewish diaspora. And the city of Mashad is the most fanatically religious city in all of Iran. A Shiite stronghold, a pilgrimage site with a long history of maiming and massacring infidels. So you need to know a bit about Mashad to really appreciate how difficult it was to grow up feeling as if I was at the intersection of medieval Mashad and 20th century New York City. My parents lived in the city of Mashad. My ancestors came from that city, and it's a city of zero tolerance for anyone who's different. You cannot in any way compare it to Tehran, the capital, which is like Paris. Tehran was a cosmopolitan city in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. We're talking about that time when my parents were in Iran. And at that time, an affluent Jewish family from Tehran would send their daughter to a Swiss boarding school. In contrast, in Mashad, girls were kept out of classrooms. They were kept illiterate. My mother was illiterate. My grandmothers were all illiterate. And they were also forced to marry at a very, very young age. For example, my father's mother was forced at the age of 9 to marry my grandfather, who was 29. So just imagine a 9-year-old marrying a 29-year-old man. And that was the norm. That was the expected. My mother at the age of 14 was strong-armed into marrying my father. She was 14, he was 34. Again, a 20-year age difference. And a lot of that is what my father believed in and what he came from. Meanwhile, the Jews in Mashad were crypto Jews. They were living underground. They were pretending to be Muslim. It was the only way to survive. My mother, for example, wore the black chador, and it had eye slits, and she would peer through these eye slits. She would be covered from head to toe in black and look like all the other Muslim women. My father would read from the Quran in the public squares 5 times a day alongside other Muslims. He knew the Quran like the back of his hand. And yet in the secrecy and privacy of their home, they were devout Jews, what you today would call an Orthodox Jew. They belonged to a tight-knit, small community of Jews that lived this way, a life of duplicity, a paranoid life, always in fear of being pillaged, pilfered, women raped, killed. So it was very, very difficult. So it was right after World War II when my mother decided to drag my father and my two brothers and bring them to the United States. And that's a whole story of its own as to why. And a few years later, I was born. So when I was born in New York, I was very confused. I mean, my father had brought Mashad and all of the values, all of the mores of this medieval city into our living room. And then here I was, a little American girl going to public school. At the time, it was Kew Gardens, Queens. And, you know, being exposed to other American girls and how they lived. They read, once we could learn to read, they were reading books. My father forbade books. And this has a lot to do with Mashad because girls were kept illiterate. And the whole idea was that the prevailing wisdom was that an illiterate girl will turn into an excellent wife, that she won't have an opinion, that she won't be difficult in any way. She won't be contrary. She won't be filled with ideas. There'll be harmony in the home. However, I'm growing up in New York City, and my father believed it was a law that children had to go to school, girls had to go to school. So he felt like his hands were tied, but he did not want to see me reading books. And so I have a chapter about reading under the covers with a flashlight at night, and terrified that I'd be caught. And it felt like, you know, those books that I had under the covers in bed felt like contraband. And I felt like I was a criminal. It felt like an illegal act, which of course made it a little more exciting also, but terrifying in addition. And his wish that I marry at a very young age, of course, he wasn't thinking the age of 9, but he was thinking early adolescence, and was anti-education for me. I have 2 older brothers who were born in Iran and came here when they were very young. And, you know, the values were different. The feeling was that the boys should be educated. They should develop themselves. They should, if they want to have a career, they should. But it was a different standard for me. And I understand now, of course, as to where it all came from. But growing up, I was totally confused as a child. And as a teenager, rather upset, although I was a deferential, quiet girl. And so I kept a lot of it to myself. And I write about that. And I was determined to go off to college, which is it's a wild chapter in the book because I had to forge my father's signature whenever I was sending out an application. And I don't know how I ever thought I could pay for college because I was applying to private schools. I mean, I didn't think it through. I just wanted to apply. And when I finally was accepted and was going to go to Barnard College, my father went on a suicidal hunger strike. And he was serious. This was 10 days of not eating, sipping water, but not eating. And I thought that I was going to be his assassin, like I was going to murder my father because of college. And you can imagine, you know, the conflict. You know, am I crazy? Should I not be doing this? How can I live my life knowing that I committed patricide? So there's a lot of that. And I'm not going to give away too much of the endings because I do want you, if you haven't read the book, I want you to read the book. But there's a lot of humor in the book because there are culture clashes and misunderstandings. Iran and America are diametric opposites. And my parents were diametric opposites. My father was very withdrawn, silent, traditional, dictatorial, and forbidding. And my mother was a rebel. She was a loose cannon, irreverent, loud. He was silent and always wanted silence. And she spoke her mind and did whatever she wanted. So there was a lot of conflict. And so it's interesting because the mother and the father were opposites, the two countries were opposites, and I felt caught in between. I wanted so much to have my parents and respect them and have their love, and I didn't want to lose them. And at the same time, I didn't want to lose me. You know, as I was growing up and developing and beginning to have interests and curiosity and ambitious drives, I didn't want to lose me. And how do you navigate the two? How do you keep both when they seem to be opposing one another? So if you like, Susan, I can just read a few paragraphs, maybe the first chapter, beginning with the first chapter. So you can hear the tone of the book.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. The first chapter is called Closet Full of Oscars. Born in 1925 Iran, Mom had been forced to live as an underground Jew in the fanatically religious city of Mashad, a Shiite stronghold and pilgrimage site with a long history of maiming and massacring infidels. Head bent, breathing through a black chador, peering through an eye slit, she slunk through alleyways, faceless and shapeless, passing as Muslim. The chador was more to her than just a cloth covering. It was the symbol of her suppression and target of her rage. Years later, Mom told me about one sun-scalding summer afternoon when she and her stepmother, Yochebed, were hauling sacks of fava beans home from the market. Both were heavily shrouded, properly groomed, Islamicized for outside eyes. My mother, 14, and recently married to my 34-year-old father, was already 3 months pregnant. As her cloaked face dripped with sweat, she spat out in Farsi. I hate chadors. I'm ripping mine off. Why are we hidden? Why can't men look at us? We're allowed to look at their hideous faces, their bare arms and legs. Shh. Yochebed gestured for her to lower her voice. The imams are keeping us safe. A woman's lips, hair, elbow, even her ankle can drive a man crazy. If we conceal ourselves, men can control themselves. Kuf de Bala, Mom cursed through blasts of sticky air and suffocating drapes. I'm not responsible for their unruly penises. Men should learn to lock their crotches. While chadors were designed to hide women, hers incubated visions of a headlong and noisy break for freedom. 8 years later, she uprooted her husband and 2 young sons and spearheaded the family's fretful, lengthy, circuitous migration from Mashad to Manhattan. On the eve of their departure, Mom lit a match and torched her black chadors, turning heavy cloths and the weight of their meaning to ash. In New York City, unveiled and thoroughly seen, she speed sorted through Saks Fifth Avenue's dress racks, searching the very finest. She ran her fingers along crushed velvet, squeezed densely sequined organza, and fondled sumptuous chiffon, scanning for plunging necklines that screamed, "Look at me." At home, she donned bright colors, convoluted patterns, 3D textures that made me cringe as an adolescent. To this day, I can't wear fire engine red, her color of choice. At home, she hand grind steaks, pickle every conceivable vegetable, tend a garden packed with plum tomatoes, Persian cucumbers, mint, and insist on ironing all bed sheets, undershirts, even cotton underpants. Between waxing floors and polishing walls, she baked, broiled, and basted. Mom scoffed at women who were slow and celebrated those who were hyperactive. By adolescence, I knew Mom wasn't the woman I wanted to be. Her hustle and bustle was not repugnant to me. However, her driving need to be the best back-breaking housewife who ever lived was. By out-cleaning, out-cooking, she felt she was outshining all other wives. Striving for perfection as she tackled domestic chores seemed foolish, trite, a waste of life. While she stood on top of a ladder, triple-checking ceiling moldings in search of a missed speck of dust, I vanished into Moby Dick, popular mechanics, whatever printed matter I could lay my hands on. The more she scraped and scoured our spick and span home, the more I dove into schoolwork, disappeared into textbooks, acing every exam. She was loud, latchless, emphatically visible. I, her polar opposite, navigated my path, concealed, seeing much and saying little, while she publicly aired whatever crossed her mind. I conducted inner dialogues I knew no one could hear but me.
Thank you so much, Esther. That was really a good overview and introduction to the book. Would you like me to show those few pictures that we have?
Sure.
Okay, I will try to do that. We'll start here. Okay, you can speak to these. Whoops, whoa, they went too fast. 1 second, sorry. I hit the space bar too quickly there. PowerPoint from beginning. Oh, God. Let me go back here. All right, let's try this again. Okay. Are you seeing it?
No.
No. Okay. Let's. Okay, I have to share screen first. Sorry. Share screen.
Okay, so this is what we're looking at here is the cover of the book, and I am carrying an American flag and standing on a Persian carpet, and it really is the culture clash. And I'm about 3 years old in that picture. We can go on to the second. This is a map of Iran, and I wanted those of you who don't know where Mashad is right now, that it's right there where the arrow is. It borders on Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. It's far, far east. And if you take a look at where Tehran, the capital, is, that's Tehran right there. So you get a sense as to where they are in relation to one another. Okay. This photo is a photo of my parents when they first got married. And my mother here is 14. She did not know my father. He had seen her at an underground Jewish wedding, and there was a mechitza, a cloth divide, and he peeked through the divide and he saw her and he thought she was beautiful. And just based on that, he decided he's going to marry her. My father is 34 here and my mother is 14. This is my mother with her black chador. When she would step out into the marketplace, she'd cover her face completely. Of course, you know that she was an observant Jew, but she was disguised here as a Muslim. These are my paternal grandparents. I wrote a lot about Moshe, who is my father's father, and Tuti, who was my father's mother. Again, a very, very large age difference. She was 9 when she married him, and he was 29. This is my great-grandfather, Benjamin. This is Benjamin. I also wrote about him a bit. This is my father's grandfather. This is the tomb of Queen Esther. She is supposed to, this is in the city of Hamadan, where she is buried. And in the book, my mother is determined to have a daughter. My mother was an orphan, and she never knew her own mother or her father. They both died. Mother died giving birth to her, and her father died when she was 2. And so she always wanted a daughter and wanted to call her Esther. So before leaving Iran, she insisted that the family go to Hamadan, and she threw herself on top of this coffin and prayed to Queen Esther for a daughter. And when she arrived in the United States, which was over a year later, because it was quite a difficult journey, leaving Iran and arriving in America. But when she did, a few years later, I was born. And so she attributed it to having prayed to Queen Esther. Now here I am again, a toddler. We can move on to the next one. I have a chapter in the book where I tell you about a Purim contest that I participated in. We belonged to an Ashkenazi shul in Kew Gardens, and we were supposed to dress up. And my mother insisted that I dress up as a Bukharian shepherd. And I was so embarrassed because every other child had this American career costume persona. You know, you have the chef, you have the nurse, you have the doctor bending over and bowing. But I was a Bukharian shepherd, and it's a comical story. I did finally make it to Barnard, and this is a photo of me at Barnard College when I was a student there. And this is a photo of my mother and myself later in life.
Thank you so much, Esther. Okay, I have some questions that our committee put together and also that I developed when I was listening to Esther at another interview program that she was on. And I'll start asking the questions. Can you elaborate on the situation that pushed your parents to leave Iran? Was there more than what happened with your brother's ear?
Again, this was in the 1940s, and they were living in Mashad, but they had recently moved to Tehran. And Tehran is considered, as I told you earlier, a very sophisticated, progressive city in comparison to Mashad. And they were sending my 2 brothers, who were toddlers at the time, to an elite private nursery school. Now, this story is important because it was really the straw that broke the camel's back. My parents had suffered tremendous anti-Semitism in Mashad. And here they were now in Tehran, living above ground, sending their boys to this classy nursery school. And one day my brother David, who I believe was around 2-3 years old at the time, came home with a burnt earlobe. It turned out that the teacher, who was Muslim, felt he was misbehaving and took a poker stick and stuck it into the fireplace and pressed the poker against his earlobe and called him a dirty Jew. And my other brother, who is only a couple of years older, witnessed all of this. So they came home, and David, the one with the burnt earlobe, was crying hysterically. His earlobe was swollen and bleeding, and my mother found out what had happened. And that's when she said, we're leaving. She said, you know, we have suffered for generations. We've hidden our true identity. We have always lived in the fear of being murdered and raped and all forms of persecution. Why am I living here? I will not allow my sons to experience what I experienced or what my ancestors experienced. We're getting out of here right now. And my father did not want to leave. He had a reputation in Iran, a very positive one within the Jewish community. He was living comfortably. Of course, it was his culture, his language, his history, his background. He did not want to leave. But she strong-armed him. She, you know, even though he was a very strong character, she outmuscled him. And she basically said, I'm taking these two boys, whether you like it or not. It was quite an exodus. You know, in those days, you did not jump on TWA and come to New York. It was donkeys and mules and horse and carriage and go to Afghanistan. And then from there, they went to India. And in India, they thought they'd be there a few days. They were there 13 months and they couldn't get out. It was an odyssey. But it really was about history compounding itself. And my mother couldn't take it anymore when finally her toddler son was being injured.
Thank you. Another question, similar kind of, can you elaborate on the situation where your brother fell out of the car and was unable to be found for some time? Did your father really believe that he had been kidnapped at that point?
I don't think I said that he believed that he was kidnapped. The story is about, well, this is the Hamadan story, where my mother was insisting that my father take the boys, that they rent a car, they have a driver, and they go to the city of Hamadan so she could throw herself on Queen Esther's tomb and pray for a daughter. So that was the whole idea. So they were in this car and they had hired a driver, and my brother Albert, both of them were very young at the time, and Albert was playing with the doorknob and it swung open. And they were in the midst of these Zagros mountains. I mean, it was wilderness where they were driving, and he flew out. And according to the story that my mother told, and this is one of the few stories my father would tell, because my father did not like to share stories, but this one he did tell. And he flew out, and according to my father, the wind carried him. The wind was wild, and he was very frail and light. And somehow these mountains and the peak that they were on, he just flew. And my mother realized he was missing because she wasn't aware of it at the time. And she screamed out in Farsi to stop, for the driver to stop. And my father went racing through these hills trying to find my brother Albert. This is the eldest brother. And it's a heartbreaking story, especially the way my father told it, where he really believed his firstborn son, who he adored, was lost forever and he would never find him, because he was scrambling up and down hills and screaming, Albert, Albert, and he could not find him. And the kidnapping, that the reason I think perhaps someone used the word kidnapping is because when he told the story, he said he felt that the winds had kidnapped him, not that there was a human being that had kidnapped him. And he started praying to God. And for him, it was like a biblical moment when he stumbled over Albert's body all of a sudden. and he lifted him and brought him back into the car. But my father was, he had a very, very strong connection to Judaism and a very strong feeling about Hashem, about God. He always felt God was with him, and he felt that he was having dialogues with God and God was looking after him. And this was another story where he felt protected by God.
Thank you. Okay. What inspired you to write this book? Was there a moment that you said, I have to tell my story?
I wouldn't say a moment, I'd say a lifetime. I think I thought about this for decades and decades, nonstop. I'm the first female in my family that's literate, that can read and write. So that I felt a certain obligation to give voice, not only to the women who were kept silent, but even to the men who were afraid to write their own stories. Here they are pretending they're Muslim. They're not going to keep a diary or a journal and write about the truth. So I felt a certain moral obligation to put their story down, to put mine down. That's number one. Number two, I think the Mizrahi story, the story of the Jews who came from the Middle East, is not really known. You know, everyone's kind of lumped together and they're not the same. The Jews who came from Egypt had a different culture, a different language, different mores. The Jews who came from Iran are different. The ones from Iraq are different. From Syria, very different. And I felt that the Mashadi Jews, who are often compared to the Marranos of Spain, by those who know about the Mashadi Jews, they will make that comparison. But many do not know anything about the Mashadi Jews. And I felt that they needed to be threaded into the tapestry, into the Jewish tapestry, that we have Jews who come from around the world, and they have fascinating stories as to how they survived, and what they brought with them from that culture, and how it affected their children growing up in another country outside of the home of their parents. And so the Mashadi Jews, the story has not been written. And I really wanted it to be part of Jewish history as well. And then there's another reason. I mean, there are many, many reasons. I found my home life very confusing. And I felt by writing about it through the lens of a toddler, the lens of a child, the lens of an adolescent, the lens of a young adult, and of course my interpretation kept changing as I evolved, helped me also make a lot of sense out of the chaos.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take a couple questions now we have wonderful chat tonight. Let me back up a little and see if I can scroll up in the chat and get the first question. In your parents' time in Iran, did most of the Muslim neighbors know who were crypto Jews and leave them alone, or would they be surprised and merciless when a Jewish family was discovered?
Well, it's another good question, because it really was a charade. On the one hand, the Jews pretended they were Muslim, but they were all living together in a Jewish ghetto, and the ghetto was called Eidgah in the city of Mashad. And they hid their rituals, but they were living together, and the Muslims knew who the Jews were. So one of my father's responsibilities within the community was to pay the imams and the mullahs off, to grease their palms and have them look the other way. Every few weeks, my father would collect money from the Jewish community and give it to an imam to basically be benevolent towards them. And yet at the same time, they pretended, of course, they were Muslim. So there was both going on. So the Muslims knew who the Jews were, but they went along with the charade. And every once in a while, they'd get an itch and they had a need to be violent and to break into Eidgah, the ghetto, and to murder, pillage, pilfer, rape girls. So they always lived with fear and unrest, and the mullahs were being paid off. Sometimes they would take the money and look the other way for a few months, and sometimes they wouldn't.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, did you have friends as a child?
Did I have friends? Yes, I had friends, but my father didn't want me to have friends. He had a very strong feeling that, well, you see, he didn't explain these things to me. It was only later that I understood it. As a child, he did not want any other child to come over. And if anyone called, he would, and he'd say hello, and the person said, "Is Esther there?" He just slammed the phone. So he tried to keep everyone out. However, I went to school. I had friends. I did make friends. I had friendships. And my mother was the opposite. And she would say, invite them over when your father's not home. And so let's say he'd come home at around 5:30, 6 o'clock at night from work. And I knew that at 3 o'clock, 3:30, I could bring a friend over and I'd get her out by 4:30, 4:45. So I was sneaking them in and out, but I did have friends, yes.
Okay. Another question is, could you address the Mashad community today in Long Island? I hear they are a very insulated community.
Well, there are many communities. There's a strong Mashadi community in Great Neck in Long Island. There's a large one in London and in Hamburg, Germany. In Milan, Italy, has a very large Jewish Mashadi community. In Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and I'm sure in other cities as well. But back to Great Neck, they are a tight-knit community and they prefer that their children marry amongst themselves. You know, during my father's day in Mashad, the trend was to marry your first cousin, and they were all marrying first cousins. My mother's parents were first cousins. My father's parents were first cousins. And if you married outside of a first cousin, it was taboo. It was marrying what today would be, let's say, marrying a non-Jew. It was not acceptable. My father, even though he was a very traditional man, the one time he rebelled in his entire life when he decided to marry my mother, and she was not a first cousin. She was a Mashadi Jew, but she was from the Levi family, and he was from the Amanoff family, and he defied all rules and he married her. Today in Great Neck, they're not pushing first cousins. What they really want is that their child marry another Mashadi. However, there are some who are marrying Ashkenazis now, so it's beginning to change.
Another similar question is, what is the situation of Jews in Iran today, especially in Mashad?
I'm not an authority on this, but I can tell you what I know. There's a very interesting journalist who contacted me, and she lives in Vienna, Austria, and she's writing about the Mashadi Jews. And so as a journalist, she flew to Iran, and this was very recent, and she went to Mashad, and she wanted to see what's going on there. And she came back and she told me that she couldn't find one Jew. So according to her, there are no Jews living in Mashad now. There might be. I mean, what if there were a few that she couldn't find? But there certainly isn't a community there anymore.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to some of our committee's questions for a minute. Why do you think your mother told you that she was buying you the doll and then give you the very disappointing empty box? Did you ever find out what her purpose was in doing that?
It was a mystery for a long time, and I write about that. Every once in a while, as I grew older, that empty box would come back to mind, and it felt like a metaphor. It felt like there was something missing in her. There was something, a disconnect. Um, so, I mean, I have a theory now as to what that might have been, but I'm not positive. I observed her. I was always a watcher and a listener. And over the years, I watched her and I saw that she had difficulty with children. She couldn't say no. She couldn't say no to children. She could say no to adults very easily, but not to children. And I think I wanted that doll, and she couldn't say, I don't have the money right now. If that was the case, whatever the reason might be, she couldn't say no. So her way through it was to say, okay, I'll get it for you. She takes the doll, she goes to the cashier, and she comes back with a box and puts it on my lap. I'm in a stroller, and we go home. And when I open up the box later on, I see it's empty. And it was crazy making for me because it did not make any sense. She was so enthusiastic when I said, I want that doll. And of course you're going to have the doll. And I was a very deferential child. So it's not as if she said no, I would have had a meltdown in the store. I didn't have temper tantrums. And yet I think she didn't think through consequence. Like it might be worse to come home. And then if she sees there's nothing in that box, will she have a temper tantrum? As opposed to if I say it now and explain why I can't give it. My mother didn't have those thought processes. She was impulsive and she wanted to make it easy right then and there, especially with children. And I think perhaps she identified with the child, and in that case, me, because her stepmother, Yocheved, never said no to her. Never said no to her. And there was something I always saw with she was even when I had children and our children were very young, and my mother could never say no. And they would ask for something ridiculous, and she couldn't explain why the answer was no. So I think it had something to do with that.
I see. Okay, thank you. Considering the difficult relationship that you had with your parents, particularly with your father, as you described in the book, what were your coping skills? Do you think the relationship with your brother is what helped get you through, with your brothers?
Well, I think I also have to correct some of that. I mean, my father, I experienced him as difficult as a child. But as I grew, and certainly as I entered adolescence, I started to see different parts of him. And I realized that he's not showing all of himself. Like he really had a very tender side to him. And he was nurturing in his own way. If any of us got sick, he was the one who would soothe and comfort and reassure and be by our side. My mother would be out the front door. If I had a low-grade fever, she was nowhere to be found. It freaked her out. And my father suddenly became like this, he was like a saint. And I saw the way he was with animals. I mean, if there was a pigeon in the backyard with a broken wing, he was there tending to this pigeon. There was something about taking care of the ill, the broken, the weak, and he would come through. And I write about that. I thought he was a closeted Albert Schweitzer. And I loved him for those qualities. But how did I make it through? My brothers played a large role, yes, no question about it. They were heroic. and one is 10 years older than me, and the other is 7 years older. And they became parents. They were parentified children. They parented my parents, they parented me. I mean, my brother Albert took me bra shopping. He was the one who noticed I need a bra, and this is when I was about 12 years old, around there. And my mother was oblivious. And it's the way he took me bra shopping. And it was the kind, gentle, sensitive manner in which he did the whole thing. And so my brothers were very much like parents.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any specific Iranian customs that you still practice? For example, do you still cook Iranian Jewish foods?
They're labor intensive and they're delicious. So yes, I will do it occasionally. My children, who are Ashkenazi, love Persian food. So every once in a while, as a treat, I will make it. Yes.
Okay, I guess that's you, the sirens. I don't think it's me. I don't know. Okay, let's see. Let me go back to the chat and see if we have other questions. Somebody wanted to know, were your parents able to keep kosher in Mashad?
Yes. My father was the shochet, and they would secretly kill chicken and slaughter chicken and do it the kosher way, of course, and then distribute it amongst others, the other members of the Jewish community. And they had a lot of vegetarian dishes, and they separated meat from dairy. And they were extra careful. And yes, they did. I even write about how my mother, in order to pretend that she's a Muslim, she would occasionally buy non-kosher meat and just to appear like she's like everyone else, and then walk down an alleyway and give it to a beggar or leave it for some animal, a dog or a roaming dog or cat, and she just dispense of it and then come home. But yes, they kept kosher very strictly.
Okay. And did the Jews in Mashad pray communally, or were they just observing only in the home?
I didn't hear the first part.
Oh, did Jews in Mashad pray communally or only in their homes?
They prayed communally, and they did this underground. In fact, it's very interesting because I once saw a design of what this ghetto looked like, Eidgah, and it had like these underground tunnels so they could go into each other's homes without coming out, and they could pray communally together.
Okay. Yeah. A couple more questions in the chat. What kind of work did your father do in the United States? And did you speak Farsi at home?
My parents spoke Farsi at home growing up because I was going to school here in the States. I had answer in English, but I was always hearing the Farsi. Yes, and well, the story about work is a complicated one, and that's also in the book. My father struggled in the beginning, the first few years here. He was a merchant in Iran. He didn't have a profession the way Americans have professions. It was hard to make a living. He borrowed from some cousins. He borrowed money. We had a wonderful neighbor, American neighbor, that was also loaning money to my father so that he could feed the family. This is before I was born. And something almost miraculous happened. My father had an idea. He remembered goats. He used to have farmland, and he knew what goats were all about. And he remembered the very soft, fuzzy hair that grows on a goat underneath the spiky hair. So he wrote to someone in Iran and asked him if he could just mail him a bag of that very fuzzy hair. And he took that goat's hair to various mills, factories in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, to see if it could be turned into a yarn, and then eventually a fabric. Long and short of it, there was a mill that said they can do it, and they did, and they called it cashmere. And so this was the early 1950s. Actually, it was the late 1940s, early 1950s when he started importing this hair, and he was supplying it to this particular mill. And cashmere was the rage. It became the rage, and he had a lot to do with that. So of course he did very well. On the other hand, he came from a country that did not use attorneys, and they did not write up contracts. They believed in handshakes, and a handshake was very, very significant. If you lie, if you cheat after you've given your hand, no one will work with you again. You lose your, what they call arduous. You lose your face, your reputation, you're untrustworthy. So that handshake meant a lot in that world. In America, a handshake doesn't mean anything. And he was not aware of that. So he did not have a contract drawn. And after a number of years, they decided that they were going to import directly from Iran, and they could just bump him out, which they did. So then he plummeted. But the rest I'm not going to tell you because there's a mystery. You know, I thought he was supporting us, and I didn't know what was really going on. And later on, when I was at Barnard, there was a blow up, and I found out that he was in serious debt. So his story has a lot of highs and lows.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Do you have any idea of how many generations of your family lived in Iran?
I've been told that we go back 2,700 years.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of generations.
A lot of generations, and it goes back to the Babylonian exile.
Okay.
So, my ancestry was deeply, deeply rooted in what was back then Persia.
Okay, very good. Let's see. Your mother's reaction to her, I don't remember this, I read this, but I don't remember this. Your mother's reaction to her stepmother when she found out she wasn't her biological mother was extreme. Can you explain?
Can I explain? I can't explain. It was very extreme. You know, Yocheved, her stepmother, was a very good woman. From everything I've learned, and I have checked it out, she was a gentle, soft-spoken woman, and my mother never said that she wasn't. And my mother actually said she did love her up until the age of 10. And this is when some neighbor, Jewish neighbor, pulled my mother aside and said, "Stop calling Yocheved Momon John." Momon John in Farsi means mother dearest or beloved mother. Stop calling her Momon John. She's not your mother. And your mother died giving birth to you. She's not your genetic mother. And my mother went insane. I mean, she went back to Yocheved and was pounding on her chest and saying, "Tell me the truth. Are you my mother? Are you not my mother?" And Yocheved said, "I wanted to wait. I wanted to tell you the story once you were married, once you had someone who loved you and would look after you. I did not want to tell you the story now, but the truth is that your mother died giving birth to you, and your father married me right afterwards in order to raise you, and then he died when you were 2. Well, my mother from that moment on hated her stepmother. And one way of showing it was by no longer calling her Momon John. And she started calling her Zan Padar, which means my father's wife. And it was really demoting her big time. And later in life, I was always asking about Yocheved. My mother didn't want to talk about her. She'd give me little bits and pieces about the story. And I kept bringing it up. And so when I was 20, when I was 30, when I was 40, I was bringing it up like, Mom, how come you didn't like how come I don't see one photo of Yocheved? And she's the woman who raised you. She wasn't my mother. My mother was like stuck on the fact that she wasn't her genetic mother. And a lot of her rage was unfortunately displaced onto Yocheved. The feeling of just being gypped. She really had this feeling. She was gypped by being born in Mashad. She was gypped by losing her parents. And she was gypped by being forced into marrying my father. And it was all compounded. And it was part of the same rage. And it was only recently when I started writing the book 5 years ago, and a cousin of mine said he has a photo of Yocheved. Would I like it? And he lives in Italy. And I said, please. And he mailed it to me. And I actually got to see some of her photos. But prior to that, my mother would not allow even an image of Yocheved into our home.
Okay, there's a couple more questions, but I see we're at the 1 hour mark. We've recorded this session, and the questions in the chat, I believe, are also recorded. So I think if it's all right, I think there was just one more I was going to ask you that you really didn't address, but I can't find it now. Oh, do you have you been back to Iran? Do you have any relatives there that you're aware of?
I never went to Iran, and I'm very sorry that I never did. When I was a teenager, my father would travel back and forth on occasion, and he would invite me to join him. And back then, when I was 15, 16, the thought of going to Iran, it seemed like, dirty and ugly and uninteresting. And I'd say, no, I'm not interested at all. And now that it's impossible. I mean, with my passport, the name Esther, I have Israel stamped all over it because I've been to Israel many times. The fact that I'm Jewish, the fact that my maiden name is Amini, Iranians would pick up on that very quickly, the Jewish, the Iranian, and I would be stuck there. I mean, there is no embassy to go to, American embassy, no one to protect you. So now it would be impossible, and I'm really sorry I never took my father up on his invitations.
Okay, well, Esther, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. And Allison, you have something you want to add, and then we're going to introduce our rabbi who's here somewhere that I don't see.
He is here. I was just putting my finger up to say Rabbi Schonbrun has been able to join us, and he would like to say a few words at the end. So Rabbi, if you would unmute yourself. And for those of you who want to see the rabbi, put your screen on speaker view.
You can listen. I apologize for being late. I want to first of all thank Esther for presenting tonight. I got to catch part of it, and it was very interesting and appropriate actually to be talking about Persia and Iran. We're not quite there yet, but we're about a month away from Purim, maybe a little more, so appropriate timing. And thank you so much for being with us. And I want to thank Allison and Sue and the entire committee. If I start naming people, I'm going to leave somebody off, so I apologize. I don't have those in front of me. Pam and our office staff, these things don't just put themselves together. It's been a very interesting time in our congregation generally over the past almost year at this point that we've been gathering and having events. And believe it or not, I'm proud to say, a little shameless plug, we've really been doing very well and a good job at keeping ourselves connected, whether it's minyan twice a day or Shabbat services every week, or program after program after program after program, etc. This group, among others, has really been wonderful in helping keep us connected and in helping us meet new friends. There's so many people on the screen that we don't all know each other, and that's really wonderful. In addition to the wonderful content, it also lets us know in these really difficult times that we're not alone. There are other people that are just trying to make it and learn something new and stay safe and healthy and connected. And so I just want to thank everyone who made tonight possible, and thank really all the wonderful leaders that we have in the congregation, both staff and lay leaders, for making this happen. And you should feel free to check out our website and see what kind of programs we have. I'm happy to have you hop on to all sorts of things. You can reach out to me directly. You can reach out to our executive director, Pam Cardullo, who's also on the call directly. Allison, in terms of book event questions. The next book event is we're going to be learning about The Lost Shtetl by Max Gross in March. So stay tuned for that, and we'll look forward to seeing people there. I hope that everybody is safe and healthy and managing. Just remember, we're just going to keep taking it one day at a time, and eventually we will get through. And that's what I want to conclude with. Esther wants to say something. So
I just wanted to
in the way of the author.
I just wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to thank you for the invitation, for being interested, reading the book, your wonderful questions. It really means a lot to me. I also wanted to let you know that if you need to reach me for whatever reason, if you have a question or you want to invite me to a different venue, you can reach me through my author's website, which is Esther Amini, one word, esteramini.com. And when you go there, there's a contact button. You just click it and you can send me a message and it'll come to me. I also had one other thought I wanted to share. Those of you who really loved Concealed and felt that they wanted to know what to do to help Concealed enter the world, the way is to give it 5 stars on Amazon. This is assuming you love the book. If you give it 5 stars, Amazon is very, very powerful. And what they do is they promote books that get 5 stars. So it's wonderful for it to enter the Jewish world, which is something I'm making sure will happen. But it's also great for it to enter the secular world and for others to know about the Mashadi story. So that would be appreciated if you do so. Thank you.
And Esther, I just realized I never mentioned the book was named one of the Kirkus Best Books of 2020.
Yes.
So those of you who haven't read it, go out and get it. Go out to Amazon or your local bookstore or wherever. I'm reading it now. I'm 95% there. It's a wonderful book. Thank you, Esther.
We forgot one other thing, which we talked about in the beginning and we all forgot, which is that since we're not together at our normal events when we are there in person, we ask our authors, as we would Esther if we were in person, if you bought the physical book, we ask our authors if they would be willing to sign the book for us. Since we're not together, we have an alternative for that. And we have book plates, which if you are interested, you can email me.
I put my email in there.
Oh, okay. You can email Susan. Susan's email is on the screen. You can email Susan and let her know that you would like a book plate to put in your book. We will mail those book plates to Esther and ask her to sign them.
Sure.
She can mail them back to us. But when you email us, you must give us your address so we can then mail them to you. Okay, so there are book plates available for those of you who would like them for your books. And thank you to all of you from all over the country, from Canada, from Congregation B'nai Israel, and of course for all of our members from Congregation Toradel, for all of your ongoing support for Meet the Author and for the love of reading. Thank you so much.
Allison,
Yes,
can I just say one thing to Esther?
as long as everybody wants to listen, you absolutely
They
can.
don't even have to
Not
listen
throwing
to me.
anybody out.
If Esther would like to listen to me, that's fine. I don't need everybody else. What I would like to say is that, just as you just said, I loved this book. And I loved it so that I went to Amazon, bought 2 new books, sent them to my sisters-in-law,
Yay.
and they just got them a day or so ago. And the other thing I wanted to quickly tell you is that I'm the youngest of 3 brothers. My oldest brother was 11 years older than me. Next was 10, and now and one is 2 years older than me. And they helped me through, you know, some not that my parents were the same, but you know, just if there was a time where I was upset or whatever, particularly one of them would come and sit by my bed. And one other thing, I loved the chapter Cornell. I loved it. Yes. So,
Yeah, it was good.
so anyway,
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Wonderful.
you're welcome.
Thank you,
A
Barbara.
lot of people are asking where the recording is going to be. We will have the recording posted on the website that we referred to earlier, www.torah-l.org, but it won't be there till we get our technical person that can put it up there.
And it will be on the website. If you go to the website and you click on the link that says get involved and go down to the page that says meet the author, that is where the recording will be. Give us a couple of weeks. This recording and the whole meet the author page is new for our website. So we're working hard to get it together. We're not quite there yet, but it will be there.
Okay, anybody have anything else? And you can put it in the chat or unmute because we're getting smaller here.